A document briefly appeared on the Senate Legislative Council's official website late last night at exactly 11:47 p.m. It remained publicly accessible for just 9 minutes before being removed. But during that 9-minute window, 3 congressional researchers downloaded it. And what that document contains explains why, right now, the United States government is functioning without a reliable chain of command. Before anything else, you need to stay with this. Turn on notifications, because what I'm about to explain is not being covered on cable news, not because it's false, but because it's destabilizing. This is not rumor. This is not speculation. This is a constitutional emergency unfolding in real time, documented by the government itself. But before we get to the document, you need to understand 3 events that occurred within the last 18 hours events. The media is reporting separately without connecting them. A classified security briefing that triggered continuity of government protocols, a market signal that historically appears only before wars or regime crises, and a legislative maneuver that allows Congress to act without presidential consent. Each happened independently. All are preparing for the same outcome, a president viewed as no longer safely constrained by constitutional limits. Let's start with Wednesday morning. At 6:00 a.m., the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff convened an emergency meeting inside the Pentagon. This meeting was not listed on any public calendar. It was not announced to reporters. But 3 defense officials independently confirmed it took place and confirmed the specific phrase used in the briefing: continuity of government protocols. That phrase matters. Continuity of government is not a casual concept. It is the framework used when leaders believe normal command structures may fail due to catastrophic events, nuclear attack, mass terrorism, or institutional collapse. The last confirmed public use of this terminology was September 11, 2001. It is not invoked for routine disputes. When military leadership reviews these protocols, they are preparing for a breakdown of authority. That meeting ended shortly before 7:30 a.m. 3.5 hours later, at 9:30 a.m., U.S. financial markets opened, and something immediately went wrong. Treasury yields spiked sharply. To most people, bond yields sound abstract. But to institutional investors, they function as an early warning system for systemic risk. And then came the memo. Goldman Sachs distributed an internal risk advisory to major clients that morning. It was leaked within hours. Inside was a single phrase that froze veteran traders across Wall Street: institutional risk assessment elevated to Category 4. Category 4 is the highest level Goldman uses. It is not applied for elections, not for recessions, not for political noise. It is reserved for 2 situations only: war or a breakdown of state authority. That alert went out at 9:30 a.m., less than 4 hours after the Pentagon meeting. Then, at 2 p.m., something happened on Capitol Hill that almost nobody noticed. Senate Majority leadership quietly invoked a rarely used parliamentary mechanism buried deep in Senate Rule 22. No press conference, no speeches, just a procedural filing in the congressional record. But the effect of that maneuver is enormous. It creates a legal pathway for Congress to advance legislation without presidential approval under emergency conditions, specifically when the executive branch is deemed unresponsive or dangerous. 3 branches of government, 3 actions, 8 hours, all preparing for the same scenario. And now we get to the document that tied everything together. The document that briefly appeared online was titled Memorandum on Limitations of Presidential Authority During National Security Emergencies. It was authored by the Office of Senate Legal Counsel, a nonpartisan body of constitutional attorneys whose sole function is to advise the Senate on the lawful boundaries of power. These are not political operatives. They are institutional lawyers. The memo was posted at 11:47 p.m. Tuesday night. 9 minutes later, it was removed following an objection from the White House counsel's office. But in those 9 minutes, the damage, or depending on perspective, the warning was already done. The memo is structured into 4 sections. Section 1 is labeled Constitutional Authority Analysis, and this is where the foundation is laid. The document examines the tension between Article 1 and Article 2 of the Constitution. Article 1 assigns legislative power to Congress. Article 2 grants executive authority to the President. The core question the memo addresses is simple but explosive. When those powers collide, which one prevails? To answer that, the memo reaches back more than 7 decades to a landmark Supreme Court ruling, Youngstown Sheet and Tube Co. v. Sawyer, 1952. Here's why that case matters. During the Korean War, President Harry Truman attempted to seize control of American steel mills to prevent labor strikes from disrupting military production. His justification was national security. The Supreme Court rejected it. Even in wartime, even under emergency conditions, the president could not unilaterally override congressional authority over domestic commerce. That ruling has defined the limits of executive power ever since. Every modern president, Republican and Democrat, has operated within that framework. The Senate Legal Counsel memo invokes Youngstown not as historical commentary, but as operative precedent. It argues that Congress not only can, but must intervene when emergency powers are used in ways that threaten constitutional balance. Section 2 addresses emergency powers directly. The memo states that Congress retains the authority to revoke emergency declarations by simple majority vote. This directly challenges the National Emergencies Act of 1976, which granted presidents broad discretion in declaring national emergencies. So which authority controls? The memo's argument is blunt: constitutional powers cannot be permanently delegated away. Even if Congress passed legislation expanding executive authority, it retains the right at any time to reclaim that authority under Article 1. Statutes do not override the Constitution. Then comes Section 3. This is the section that triggered immediate panic. On page 7, paragraph 4, the memo introduces a concept that has never before been articulated this clearly in a Senate legal document. It states that in circumstances where executive actions pose a direct threat to constitutional order, Congress possesses inherent authority to temporarily suspend the transfer of military command authority pending judicial review. Read that carefully. Suspend military command authority. This is not academic theory. This is a legal framework suggesting Congress can intervene in the president's role as commander-in-chief if constitutional collapse is imminent. That single paragraph is why the document vanished from public view, but almost no one noticed what came next. Section 4 lists 14 names. All 14 are senior foreign service officers from the State Department's Office of a Legal Advisor. These are career professionals who interpret international law for the United States government. They are not political appointees. Some have served across multiple administrations for decades. And on Wednesday morning, all 14 resigned simultaneously. That office does not resign. It endures wars, scandals, transitions, and administrations of every ideology. When its entire senior legal staff leaves at once, they are signaling something extraordinary. They will not provide legal justification for what they believe is imminent. And that was only the beginning. The rupture didn't stop at the State Department. Inside the Pentagon, senior legal officers distributed internal guidance Wednesday afternoon with a chilling subject line, differentiating lawful and unlawful orders. This material exists in military training doctrine, but it is not circulated to top leadership during peacetime unless commanders anticipate receiving directives that may violate the law. This memo was not sent to junior officers. It went to flag officers, general counsels, and senior legal authorities, the people who would be forced to decide whether to execute or refuse presidential commands. That alone would be extraordinary. But it didn't happen in isolation. Within hours, multiple intelligence agencies took an unprecedented step. 5 separate agencies declined to provide the White House access to certain categories of sensitive compartmented intelligence. The official explanation cited handling concerns. Translated from bureaucratic language, it means this: the intelligence community does not trust the executive branch to safeguard critical information. When agencies designed to serve the commander-in-chief independently conclude that information sharing itself is a liability, the system has entered defensive mode. The permanent national security apparatus is shielding itself from the elected executive. At the same time, Senate Republican leadership was reaching its own breaking point. A private meeting convened in the office of Mitch McConnell early Wednesday morning. The room included 6 senators, not 4. Each was chosen for a specific reason. McConnell himself, with nearly 4 decades of institutional memory. John Thune, responsible for vote counting and caucus discipline. John Barrasso, in charge of party messaging. John Cornyn, facing a difficult re-election in a changing Texas electorate. Mike Rounds, a member of armed services with military experience. And Susan Collins, who sits on the Intelligence Committee and receives briefings most senators never see. What triggered the meeting was not political pressure, it was legal exposure. Late Tuesday night, Senate Legal Counsel briefed Republican leadership on a topic that has almost never been discussed in modern congressional history: personal criminal liability for lawmakers who enable unconstitutional acts. The statute cited was Title 18, U.S. Code Section 2384, seditious conspiracy. Typically, this law is applied to extremist groups. But Senate attorneys outlined a hypothetical scenario. If lawmakers knowingly expand emergency powers that are then used to suspend elections, deploy the military against civilians, or undermine constitutional order, those lawmakers could face criminal prosecution, not political fallout, but prison exposure. That briefing changed the calculus. McConnell framed the issue in three categories: political risk, electoral risk, and legal risk. Political risk, he argued, is survivable. Electoral risk is manageable. Legal risk is permanent. An indictment ends a career regardless of outcome. Cornyn presented internal Texas data. His polling showed a clear erosion tied directly to executive instability. Republican voters, he explained, want governance, not chaos. They want borders, inflation control, and predictability, not emergency declarations and constitutional brinkmanship. Then Susan Collins spoke. She referenced a classified intelligence briefing from earlier in the week. She could not disclose details, but her conclusion was unmistakable. The threat landscape now includes domestic instability at the highest levels. That statement landed heavily. McConnell then proposed a coordinated response. Not a press conference, not a public break. A formal letter to the White House outlining three positions: no expansion of emergency powers without constitutional justification, no campaign coordination unless rhetoric stabilizes, and full party support for incumbent senators against retaliatory primaries. One by one, the senators agreed. The letter would move forward, but the letter was only the signal. The real action came next, at 8 a.m. Thursday morning, Senate Resolution 47 was formally introduced. Its title sounded harmless: a resolution to affirm Senate authority over emergency declarations. But the language inside it is anything but symbolic. Most Senate resolutions are ceremonial. This one is structural. The operative clause states that regardless of any executive declaration, the Senate retains full authority to nullify emergency powers through a simple majority vote, effective immediately upon passage. That phrase, regardless of any executive declaration, is constitutional dynamite. It strips the presidency of unilateral emergency control. Here's what the resolution actually does. First, it establishes a fast-track mechanism to overturn emergency declarations. No committee delays, no filibuster, no prolonged debate. 51 votes and the emergency is void. Second, it requires only a simple majority. This is not a treaty. It is not a veto override. It is the Senate exercising its exclusive authority to govern its own procedures under Article 1, Section 5 of the Constitution. Third, it takes effect immediately. No presidential signature. No judicial preclearance. The moment the vote passes, the authority shifts. The constitutional foundation is solid. The Supreme Court has repeatedly ruled that congressional procedural authority is a political question beyond executive or judicial interference. The Senate determines its own rules. The president cannot veto them. Courts cannot block them. Now the numbers. 17 Republicans have committed to support the resolution. Every Democrat and both independents who caucus with them are on board. That's 68 votes. The threshold is 51. The outcome is mathematically inevitable. And this is what makes the moment unprecedented. The president has no procedural counter. He can attack. He can threaten. He can rage publicly. None of it alters the vote. Executive orders do not apply. Veto power does not apply. Even an emergency declaration cannot stop the Senate from acting under its own rules. And that is where the danger lies. History shows that when leaders accustomed to unchecked authority are boxed in, escalation often follows. Nixon didn't quietly accept limits. He fired prosecutors. Yeltsin didn't compromise. He used tanks. Erdogan responded to challenge with purges. So there are three realistic paths forward. 1. De-escalation. Rhetoric softens. Power is contained. The system absorbs the shock. Low probability. 2. Legal warfare. The resolution is challenged in court. Agencies receive conflicting directives. Authority becomes ambiguous. This is the most likely outcome. 3. Extra legal action. Emergency powers are invoked elsewhere. Domestic force is justified as restoration of order. This is the nightmare scenario, and it cannot be dismissed. And while all of this unfolds domestically, the international response has already begun. NATO convened an emergency session assessing U.S. political stability, something it has never done in its history. Five Eyes intelligence partners elevated classification protocols, quietly limiting information sharing. European institutions began drafting sanctions frameworks normally reserved for democratic backsliding states. And China raised readiness around Taiwan, testing whether the United States can respond coherently under internal strain. For decades, global stability rested on one assumption: American predictability. That assumption is now under review. This is not about a single president. It is about whether constitutional systems can still restrain power in the modern era, whether institutions can act collectively when individual authority becomes destabilizing, whether law still governs force. The next 72 hours will determine whether emergency power remains bounded or becomes precedent. History is not waiting. The Constitution is being tested, and the outcome is no longer theoretical.